Unnecessary intro song to totally waste your time. When I left the Mormon church, I was, about 25 years old, 24 years old. But when I officially did it, I was coming up on 30. I had already left, I was already done, but when I made it known to my mom, to my mother, that I was done with it, I called her and I said, I want to have, I'm leaving the church, but I don't want to leave you. I don't want to leave my family, and I don't want to leave my friends, but I'm leaving the Mormon church. I'm leaving religion altogether. And I said, and I would like to be able to have, a mature, friendly relationship with my mother, but it's hard for me to do if I know that my mother thinks I'm going to burn in hell. So can I get some clarity on that? And admit it, I was a young guy. Pushed the issue. I was trying to issue an ultimatum, basically. I wasn't thinking that. I wasn't thinking I was giving an ultimatum, but I was trying to figure out, can you still accept me and accept that I've made a choice that is a valid choice in the universe? Because that's how you get along with people. It's hard to get along with somebody who thinks you're cursed or controlled by the devil. It's abusive, really. Like, if you subject yourself to that, you're subjecting yourself to an abusive relationship, And so I was pressing the issue, and she said, never call me again. She hung up the phone, said, never contact me again. My mother did this, right? It was heartbreaking. Obviously, I called my dad, bawled my eyes out. My dad consoled me. He was just like, she just doesn't get it, and months later, she wrote a letter that was trying to say, sorry, I'm not sorry. The only reason you feel this way about the church is because I was a bad example, but nothing about, you're right, blood is thicker than water. It's more important for me to get along with you, so I will set aside my thoughts about your eternal damnation in order to get along with you. So anyway, that was a kind of an apology. And then for the rest of her life, she died a couple years ago. With the exception of the last couple of years, she just essentially lived up to that. She would call on Christmas and Easter, the Jesus holidays, to remind me, basically, that she was a good person that was going to heaven. And she was doing her obligatory call once a year to, to absolve her of her abandonment, so she could go, I didn't abandon my child. And meanwhile, you know that there's tons of, meetings with their church leaders and them saying, well, he's chosen his path. And, this myth that the Mormon church wants to keep families together, families are forever, it's not true. Because if somebody splits from the Mormon church, the Mormon church leaders literally encourage them to cut things off. You've seen this with what do you call it? The Scientology. Well, that's in the Mormon church too. It's not as hardcore, and Mormons by their nature, or most of them, are less severe, and but there are pockets. There are, there's a tremendous pressure to separate from your children or your loved ones. I remember a friend of mine was going through a divorce because he was leaving the church. And I asked him at the time, I've said this here on this channel before, but I said, is there any reason why you just don't fake it for the sake of your family and your kids? And he goes, yeah, but I had this dream one time that I woke up as an old man on my deathbed, and my kids were around me, and none of them knew who I was, because I was never honest. And I was like, whoa, shit! Now I feel stupid for even asking the question. Because I think it's important to live honestly, especially with your family and your friends. If you can't speak frankly with them, then I don't know. But anyway, so yeah, I think I have a pretty solid case to say that I was abandoned. I don't know though. Did I abandon her? I mean, that's the question. Is when somebody leaves the church, you're abandoning? I abandoned the church, right? I moved to San Francisco. I abandoned my family. I left. I did. And then I say that I was abandoned, And it's hard to reason, like, okay, but I'm the child. I'm kind of supposed to leave, right? Isn't that the idea that you move out of your house eventually? I don't know. It's interesting to think about who abandons who, you know? Clearly the church was chosen over me. This is why when I watched that Devo documentary, even though I was realizing, oh, that motherfucker, he intended to put these ideas in my head. But when he said, my mother, Mark Mothersbaugh at one point in the documentary says, my mother's brain was captured by Christ a long time ago. That hit a nerve. That struck a nerve because I've said the same things about my mom, and I have a life to prove it. It's hard for me to imagine going 30 years without ever even once trying to visit your son that moved to San Francisco. My dad came down multiple times, and he was an old guy. My dad called me, monthly at least, weekly for sometimes. No abandonment really was ever detected from my dad, even though he divorced my mom when I was an infant, and I never lived under the same roof as he did. So there was abandonment there, So anyway, abandonment complex. But what I kind of want to talk about here is that there's this element, you still feel there's a lot of desire to still defend your mom, even if your mother has sort of done you wrong and won't speak to you like an adult, where there's totally rules within the even if you're still there, you're still the son, but there's this over-governing thing that you don't have a relationship with your mom. It's all filtered through Jesus. It's all filtered through the Mormon prophet. Everything you say has to be reasoned in her mind with that. And you can see that even growing up. Whatever you'd say, she'd have to check her databases. Is this in line with the gospel? Is this in line with the Mormon church? If not, look of scorn, real disapproval, silence, if not castigation, and shame. So really hard to be honest in my house growing up. There was another thing my sister talks about, this, one of her pet peeves. She brings it up a lot, and I can totally see why it's her pet peeve. Because, when debates would arise between the kids, there were 4 of us to begin with. My mom popped out 2 kids by my dad. My dad bailed. She got married to rebound to the sheriff guy, popped out 2 more kids, and he bailed. But then for years, it was just the 4 of us, And when there would be debates, and my mom was a mess. She was a wreck during this time. I mean, bless her heart, it's not that easy to raise 4 kids when you're a single mom, I guess. But consequences, who knows, People always want to say, oh, the dad bailed or whatever. It's just like they didn't get along. Takes 2 to tango. But whenever a debate would arise, instead of my mom wanting to solve the debate or figure out what the argument was all about, she'd just start singing, there is beauty all around when there's love at home. It almost sounds creepy, right? It sounds like a haunted story. If that happened in a movie, you'd go, "What the fuck? What is going on?" We're trying to debate who's gets the last scoop of ice cream. You know, there is no effort. I don't like the contention. I don't like contention. You can't argue. Okay, but we're not solving the problem here. There's a problem to be solved here. There is beauty all around. God, it sounds like a haunted movie right now. When there's love at wah, 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 wah. You know, and so that's kind of a dereliction of duty, even right there. Again, never speak ill of the dead. I'm grateful for my life. I really am. But Lord knows some of you out there went through something similar. I mean, probably not. There's probably nobody listening to this that has many stepmothers and many stepfathers and 17 siblings to choose from. But there's one or two of you might relate anyway, But it's kind of like an abandonment of even that issue, abandonment of like conflict resolution. No, just start singing a creepy song. There is beauty all around when there's love at home. Like it's just this thing that you can just impose, just by invoking that. Oh, I'm glad you sang that song, Mom. Now my conflict with my brothers and sisters is gone. I don't have it anymore. Thanks. My dad's approach was the opposite. My dad would get in there and make a statement. He'd be like, well, there's this or there's that. Hey, you leave him alone. It's because of this. Context would be brought in and say, this isn't injustice because, or this is injustice because. He would make a judgment and a ruling in favor of one party or another based on reasoning. That's not yours. You didn't buy it. Share it. I bought it. I'm taking it from you and giving it to him. That kind of shit. Right or wrong, it's not just defaulting to a song. But anyway, so in later years in my mom's life, I don't want to get into how she treated other siblings, but, I was the only one that left in the way that I did. Others left in different ways. But weirdly, with all the kids, just to go with the 10 kids that were in the house, that were raised in the house, I think 2 of the 10 kids stayed actively Mormon. That's a bad ratio. Like, there was probably reason for her to apologize when she said, I didn't teach it the right way. It's just like, okay, yeah, well, that's kind of obvious. I was the only one to go on a mission, a Mormon mission, and I became the most fervently against the church. And they say that's funny. They talk about the math. They say the church knows about it, but the most likely to get somebody to quit the church is to send them on a mission. The success rate, I don't know where I saw this math. I saw it years ago, but it made sense to me. That up close look at things kind of makes you go, oh, yeah, I don't think I like that. Anyway, so her success rate wasn't good. Some of the older kids have come back around in their older years, but most of them, at best, are Jack Mormons. There's only 2 that I can think of that go to church every week and, really seem to declare themselves as Mormons. That's not a good ratio. It's just not a good ratio. 2 out of 10, that's crap. But anyway, in my mother's older years, she developed this charity called Hearts Knit Together, right? And to show you how strong the urge is to see the best in your mom, I thought, well, this is great. This is, and I'd use her as an example of the difference between real charity and not real charity, because I live in San Francisco and every charitable organization here is a total scam. Not one penny ends up going to the intended victims. Nothing. It's all a thing where everybody's taking a big check. And I work for a charity. I work for a charity. I work for this charitable, this nonprofit. It's a fucking scam. Every single fucking one of them is a scam. And I used to use my mom's organization, even though she wasn't talking to me except for on Christmas and Easter. I would use that as an example of a real thing. In other words, everything was donated. Nobody was getting a check except for maybe the facility that would, rental, we're renting floor space in a warehouse, that kind of thing. But everybody that worked there, which were just a bunch of old ladies in their 70s, but the organization was basically a Santa's workshop. That's what it was. Okay. It was Hearts Knit Together is like, my mom thought, well, we'll make these little kits for women that were going into battered women's shelters and refugees. Big thing in Utah. The Mormons aren't very smart. They've imported a lot of refugees. They're going to regret it later. But anyway, but basically women and refugees. No charities for men. This isn't a big shocker. You're not going to find very many women setting up charities for men. That's just not the way the world works. Men are meant to go off and die. If they're the battered man, he's a beta cuck. Because you're not supposed to be a battered man. And if you're an abuser, well, you're the worst, even though you were probably abused. There's no charities for them. There's prisons for them, but there's no charities for abusive men. Doesn't matter what happened to them. They're just go off to war, go work in the sewer, go off to die. You're disposable. Life on planet Earth is about protecting the men, or protecting the women, the daughters, the sisters, the wives. And men, shut the fuck up, right? But anyway, so her charity was no exception to that rule. It was there to benefit women, and refugees, which are, I guess, kind of like women. But it was a Santa's workshop. So everything in there was donated. People would donate. And the stock room was just like, imagine just like a little grocery store or a Target where everything was free, And they'd literally be making these baskets. I did this a couple times with my mom. In her later years, we tried to get along. We spent a little time together. She started smoking pot because of her chronic pain. She didn't smoke it. She was taking it. And she turned into a little bit of a different woman for the last few years of her life. She became like an actual real human, less judgmental. Maybe because she knew that she was using marijuana and she wasn't supposed to, according to the prophet. But it's a Santa's workshop. And I was asking her, what you do is you just go find things, and this is what the women do. And let's be honest, it was a social club. It was a social club for people her age, older women. They don't have jobs, their grandkids are not going to be around every day. So it was a social club for them to go. You could either go quilting, you could go play baccarat, you could go play dominoes. I don't know what women do, but for centuries, women have been getting together, quilting and gossiping and doing things. And my mom figured out this really good scam where she could do that thing that women do, but call it a charity, and get news coverage. She would get the news out there and PR. And she was in the newspaper and on TV a number of times. Oh, Linda, she's this wonderful woman who operates this charity called Hearts Knit Together. And they'd show these little gift baskets they'd make, and you'd make them just like a giant Easter egg basket. or a giant flower arrangement. I'm going to make a kit for a battered woman, and it's going to be a blue bear theme. And here's a blue bear. Oh, and here's a blue sweater. Here's some blue mittens. Oh, and I'm going to use the blue deodorant and the blue toothpaste and some blue this and blue that. Here's a blanket, and here's here's a book, and here's a thing. And, it all sounds really nice, and it is nice. But I asked her when I was doing it, I said, so when do we go give these to the people? Oh, we don't give them to the people. Oh, do they come get them? Well, no, they don't. I said, so what happens? She goes, we send them off to police departments and these people. I said, so you never meet the people that you make these for? No, no. I said, have you ever? No. She'd been doing it for years, You never meet the refugees or the battered women. No, no. Why? I don't know. It just that change of conversation. And it dawned on me, remember in these later years, I'm trying so hard to go, it would be nice to have a mom, even though I'm old, still would be nice to have a mom. So I'm doing everything that I can to just cut my mom the most slack as I possibly can. And I really did change in my life, and I really did see her in different ways. You realize people are just people. They have their problems, young parents are young parents, You got to cut people slack. You've got to. And I'm totally willing to do that. My mom had her life. She had her set of circumstances, and that led her. And I don't want to be bitter, and I want to have gratitude, and I do have gratitude for everything that happened in my life. But part of life is analyzing it and going, why did this happen? What's this? Why that? Why are you, you can't help but ask yourself, why are you spending every day at this place pretending you're charitable when you won't even talk to your children? Is it possible that you could spend any of that charitable energy on your own children? Like by making a phone call, and instead of filtering everything through the church, just simply ask them what's going on in their life. Take actual interest in their life. Like real interest. I get why she wasn't interested in my life. My life was scary to a Mormon person. My life, and I'm not even going to say that I was living my life in a good way. I don't think I was. But when somebody abdicates, I think a mother's duty, a parent's duty, is to stay interested and to go, what's going on here? They don't have to. I mean, I'm not proposing a law. But when they put all the energy into this charity, with all the bells and whistles that come from it, the virtue signal, I'm good, I'm good, I'm good. The phone call every year was, I'm good, I'm good. I'm going to get in heaven, I'm going to get in heaven, And you just think this is a scam. You're not even meeting the people. You don't even know if it's actually getting to them. It could be. Or maybe the cops are just tossing it in the bin, And look, I'm not trying to denigrate the intention. But if the intention, you have to analyze the intention. What's the intention? Is your intention to help somebody that's having a hard time in their life? Because that kind of requires a little bit more than just making a Santa's Workshop toy for somebody, and you never even have to give it to them. It just gets passed to somebody else. I don't even know if people really appreciate things like that as much as you imagine. It's easy when you don't have to interface with the person. You can just imagine that they were so happy to get it. Oh, somebody cares me because I got a blue bear basket with a blue deodorant and blue toothpaste and a blue bear and a blue sweater and a blue blanket. Even though my favorite color is maroon. I'm so touched. I'm so saved. Somebody cares. That's what you imagine. But I don't know. I've been the recipient of stuff like that, swag bags, and and also even just people writing a letter, somebody that's, I'm going to use the word, quote, fan, or somebody that writes something nice. And you can just feel the difference when it's for them or for you. Like, real connection needs to come with real connection. There's no substitute for that. There just isn't. There's no substitute for holding somebody's hand and looking at them in the eyes and really listening and connecting with them and talking with them and caring about them. And if you don't, you don't. There's no way to trick it. You can't beat that system. You can't pretend that you're a good, wonderful, caring, loving person by employing yourself in Santa's workshop to become a hero. And, to emphasize that point, I know I've said it here before, but, when my mom kicked the bucket a few years ago, exactly 5 months to the day before my dad kicked the bucket, by the way, I thought we had made amends. I thought we were, for the last year since she had a stroke and I'd gone back to, the stroke plus her using marijuana to take care of the pain resulting from the stroke and everything created a different person. I thought I thought, oh, she's coming around. She's facing her mortality. She's coming around. She's figuring stuff out. And it really seemed that way. Like, probably just because she was high, but you would sit around and play games and she would laugh at jokes she didn't laugh at before. And there was some genuine laughter and release that was coming from my mom in her final years, Like, one time we were just sitting around and it was the original gang of four, the four kids. Stepkids weren't there. Stepdad died a number of years ago. And, my stepfamily's great. Some of them are, some of them aren't. Let's just put it that way. Some of them are great, some of them aren't. But they're stepfamily. They're not the real family, They're not the core family. I'm sure they feel the same way about their core family. But it was the original four, The first two, me and my sister, and then the second two, my brother and my other sister. We were sitting around playing and we were talking about it, and we had some really fantastic, good laughs. And my mom was a little bit high. The rest of us weren't. But we were all enjoying my mother being more relaxed than she ever had been, less judgmental. That weird judgmental thing that my mom had, that it wasn't there. It was gone. I mean, that's chalk that one up for pot, I guess, right? But I really thought that things were great. I was really feeling good about it. I was really feeling like, oh man, and I was transferring the blame back to myself. And I was realizing, no, I'm the guy. I'm the one that I abandoned my family, And I was trying to take ownership of my life. I'm the one that did it. I left, and it's legitimately true. I left Utah, came to San Francisco. Utah didn't leave me. I left Utah, So I was really trying to take ownership of that. And I was thinking, this is good. Finally, some resolution. I'm an old man now. In my 50s, I can figure this shit out. But so gay to be talking about this shit. But my mom's dying wish was to have me banned from speaking at her funeral. And my younger sister was the protector, So needless to say, that was almost as terrible as the day my mom told me to never call her again. In fact, it was worse. I think it was worse because she's dead now. So there's no way of working around it. To find out your mom's final wish was to don't let him speak at my funeral. I don't want him embarrassing me. She didn't want me to talk about the way things had gone. She had maintained this image of herself as a leader amongst women, this charitable person making kits, Santa's workshop, Queen of Santa's workshop. And she didn't want me coming in there as if I would have said anything negative. I wouldn't have. I would have put the most beautiful, positive spin on the whole thing and made everybody cry. I have that ability, I know. I was a Sunday school teacher. So it would have all been about transformation, forgiveness, and everything. But I wasn't asked to speak, and I was asked why. And my sister just told me she didn't want you to. And of course, I freaked out. I had this big emotional episode, ran into the other room, couldn't believe it. You know, it was just crushing. I couldn't believe it. It was so insulting. It was so demeaning. It was so hurtful. It almost felt like she had her stroke and coaxed me back into her life, almost in order to. It made it the whole last few years into a lie, you know, like, oh, I'm gonna take pot, I'm gonna smoke pot, and I'm gonna prove to him that I'm a good person, and get him back in my graces, only to just spit on him by denying him the opportunity to speak at my funeral. You know? It was crazy. I mean, I still think of it and I just go, wow, I can't believe that actually happened in my life. I just can't believe, it's hard for me to believe that my sister would agree to something like that. You know? I wouldn't. I'd be like, listen, Mom, if you want that, I'm not going to do that. If you really want to tell your son that he can't speak at your funeral, you're going to have to say that. I'm not going to be the person to say that. And not only that, but even if she did say that, if I was the little sister, I'd be like, I'm not obeying that rule. No, you can speak if you want to. Say whatever you want. Tell the truth. You know? But like I said, had it not been an issue, it wouldn't have been an issue. In fact, I'm not even so sure I would have spoken at my mom's funeral, even if I was asked. I might have said, no, you know, I don't want to speak in front of a Mormon church. I'm not even a Mormon anymore. I don't need to be behind the pulpit in a Mormon steakhouse or in a Mormon meeting house. You know, I don't need to. Probably would have passed. But boy, just that. Anyway, charity. You know, what is charity? To me, charity is, it can't be superficial. You know, it's not charity if there's lines behind it. It's not charitable. I'm sorry, your donation to Red Cross, that's not charity. Nope, not by my book. You just writing it off on your taxes, sending it through a intermediary who passes it to another USAID, this and that. No. Nope. You don't get to feel good about that. In fact, you should feel shame about it. I'm sorry. I'm breaking it down that way. If you're just writing a check or you're just doing thing and you're not connected to that thing, you don't, you know, it's come up again in the press as shooting. You know, we don't need your prayers. I actually get that sentiment. Thoughts and prayers. Stop sending thoughts and prayers. You know, go ahead and think and pray, but actions count too. You don't get to say, I prayed, therefore I did my part. You don't get to say that. I'm not saying it the way leftists are saying it. The way Gavin Newsom said it, he's a scumbag. You know, they were praying when they were shot. Yeah, fuck you. That's not what we're meaning here. Okay. But if you're going to consider yourself to be a charitable person, and you don't need to, I certainly don't consider myself to be a charitable person, but can you at least reserve that word for people that are charitable? Can we offer that small bit of respect to people who are actually charitable? There are people in this world that are actually doing tough work. There are parents in this world that are good parents. When the shit gets tough with their children, they suck it up and they make a phone call and they stay present. And they say, I'm still here for you. You know? I watch this, I watch these Explore With Us things on the internet. You shouldn't do it. It's not good for your brain. But you're basically watching the actual interviews, the actual body cam, the actual 911 calls from horrific events or whatever. And I recently watched this one where a son killed the daughter of this couple, a stepdad and a mom. And the son seemed to be kind of like autistic, and he just one day went nuts, and his plan was to kill the mom, the dad, and the sister in descending order of threat. He was an Asian, half Asian kid. The mom was kind of a hippie, and he just blew his stack one day, and he got things out of order, and he murdered his sister first, tried to murder the dad, didn't work, tried to murder the mom, didn't work. They survived. But the thing that separates that Explore With Us episode from others is that they stood by the son. He murdered his sister. And his sister, by all accounts, including his own, the murderer's account, was that she was a extremely loving, wonderful, charitable person. He, in his own words, says, oh, yeah, she had no reason to die. She was the best sister. And he goes on to say how his parents were wonderful, and he doesn't know why he snapped. And there's some kind of dissociative, whatever, gobbledygook. I don't want to get into that. But it didn't make sense. The whole thing, he says, I don't know. I just planned it out, and then I snapped one day, and I did it. I had no hatred, anger. It was boredom, and it doesn't even feel like it was me. Anyway, there's autism type stuff going on there, that it seems like. But the parents in the video, unlike most of these things, they were smiling and they were remembering their daughter. And can you imagine how angry you'd be if your son killed your daughter out of cold blood? And he shot you too. He shoots you too. And you're sitting there forgiving him and saying, we love our son. And the mom at one point says, if I hate my son because he killed my daughter, then I lose both of them. And my daughter and son got along so well, he embodies a lot of the qualities of my daughter. And my daughter wouldn't have given up on him were she alive. And she's got this hippie kind of smile on. And it's kind of like, what the fuck? Are you insane, lady? But I'm thinking, no, man, that's a real mom. That's a real mom. And the stepdad, too. They understood. They didn't understand, but they realized, oh, this sucks. This is terrible. But they didn't need to be the administrators of punishment on themselves or on the other person. And that's kind of, I had this discussion with somebody else about the difference between Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. In Islam and Judaism, there seems to be this overriding thing that if you're a member of one of those clubs, it is your job to behave in such a way that all non-members are essentially know that they're not members and they're punished. They're lower beings. Islam, jihad, you must submit. Until you do, if you don't, you'll be taxed. We can lie to you. It's okay to lie to you. It's okay to lie to the infidel. It's okay to lie to the goyim. It's okay to tax the infidel. It's okay to tax the goyim. But in Christianity, it's the other way around. It's like, no, you can't treat anybody. It's not your job to administer the punishment. It's God's job to do that. In the New Testament, what you find is like, judge not lest you be judged. I'll take care of it. I'm God. I'll take care of it. Your job is to be cool with everybody. But that's not the way it is in Judaism and Islam. You're the one that to enact God's punishment or God's will upon other people. And anyway, that woman, that story was brought to light that it's just like where my mom, I think, got it wrong, unfortunately for her, and me, and my sisters, because my mom put my younger sister in that position. That was wrong of her to do that. It was wrong for my mom to put my sister, to draw my sister in on team anti-me, She drew my little sister in against me and used her in that way, and probably her ward members too, because when I went there, they were nice with me, but I was a Mormon, so I knew what they were up to, I knew that they had the mission to, and by the way, I don't resent that. Like, go ahead. I like the sentiment of come back to the flock, come back to the church and be saved, stop wallowing around out there in the darkness. But that's a nice sentiment. But there's also another way to do that, where it's just like not being judgmental and actually being honest, truthful, open, present. Because that's the key. I wrote a song years ago called "If You Loved Me, You'd Be Here." And I think it's true. I think love is presence. Love is, you know what you love because it's around you. My dog's right here. I love my dog. She loves me. It can be demonstrated by the fact that we're always together. And if you leave your family and you go far away, you probably don't love them that much. And if they don't come visit you, they probably don't love you that much. It's fun to say, I love people. Really? How much time have you spent with them? Not how much time have you spent thinking about them, but how much time have you spent in their presence? And that's a tough thing to face, really, because I'm sure upon hearing those words, the immediate thing is to go, oh shit, who do I claim to love that I haven't seen in 20 years? That I haven't called for a long time. And I'm not saying, I'm just making the claim that love is precious, love is rare. It's not this universal thing. It's an action. It's more rare than gold. When you find it, you treat it that way. That's why I don't like the dilution of the word love. I don't like the dilution of the word charity. When you start calling things that aren't love, it dilutes the concept. It doesn't dilute actual love, because actual love still exists. But when you call things that aren't love, you're cheapening the entry point. You're making it seem like all I've got to do is pray. All I've got to do is say, I love everyone equally. No, you don't. Everyone's not in your house. You're not protecting everyone equally. You're not thinking of everyone equally. Love is exclusive. And it requires, well, I don't know what it requires, but it is self-evident. You can see love because it's obvious. You can see it. Your presence. I could see the love of those parents who loved their son who killed their daughter because they were there at the jailhouse as often as they could be. Crazy shit, I know. But yeah, I started this recording to talk about charity and my little things. If you find yourself virtue signaling and overcompensating to try to prove to yourself you're good. Like if you find yourself building a charity to convince yourself you're good when really you should be focusing on your family. If you're neglecting your family or you did something wrong, maybe you did something terrible and now you've started a foundation to make up for it. I applaud that. But are the victims of your wrongdoing still alive? Are they okay? You know? Is there something you got to fix that's actual, interfacing? Or do you think that signing a check, putting a ribbon on your profile picture, changing it to black, supporting the latest thing, putting a circle around, do you think that works? Because it doesn't. It doesn't. It doesn't change you. It doesn't change anybody else, because changing you requires presence. You gotta go visit your kids. You gotta make an effort. No ceremony is going to absolve you of that duty. There is no imitation love. Imitation love is not love. Anyway, that's enough of my preaching. Thanks for listening. Unnecessary outro song to totally waste more